Hi, Charles with SirBookSage here, and this is my November 2017 wrap-up video. And this is going to be more of a non-traditional wrap-up video for me. November was an interesting month because I decided last minute to do NaNoWriMo. That really dominated most of the time I spent in November when it came to books and words. I spent most of it writing. I didn't read anywhere near the amount I read in September and October. And because of that, I didn't really see the point in doing a traditional wrap-up video where I hold up each book and give you a brief rundown of my thoughts. And one of the main reasons is all of the books that I did either finish reading in November or read cover to cover in November, except for one book, are all getting their own book reviews. So I'm going to have all in-depth discussions on the books in their own separate reviews, so I didn't really see the point in going through that here anyway. And I've been watching Silvia Kay. If you're not familiar with Silvia Kay as a booktuber, I highly recommend you go check her channel out. I will link her channel down below. And she's been talking a lot recently about the booktube process, about the wrap-up video, and even the TBR video, and how these are things she struggles with and isn't a fan of at all, and her thoughts on them. And I've been thinking about that as well. And here with November and what I know is coming December wise, I'm not going to have a traditional December wrap-up video or a traditional December TBR video either, because of how I'm kind of structuring my reading for November and for December. And I'm going to have a separate video on the kind of my December TBR video thoughts coming, I think probably next week. But I will just kind of give you the list of what I've read this month, because that's kind of the point here. And there's two books that I had started in October and finished in November. The first was Who Fears Death by Nadia Korafor. Now, I will be rereading this one more time and then doing a full-blown book review of it. It's a fascinating book, really, really great book. And I highly recommend it. I did do kind of an initial discussion of my thoughts of the book, sort of a mini discussion as a prelude to what my full-blown book review will end up being like, most likely in February. And that was in my Friday reads from the 24th. And I will put that in the cards up here. So if you're interested in hearing my initial thoughts on the book that stops short of a full-blown review, you can watch that video and where I discuss it. And the second book that I finished reading this month that I'd started in October was Deadly Curiosities by Gail C. Martin. I finished this up with 15 minutes to go in the month. And Gail C. Martin is a fantasy author. She mostly writes high fantasy, and this was her first foray into urban fantasy. And I ended up enjoying this far more than I expected, enough that I'm going to actually record a book review of this book. So that'll be coming later in this month as well. Since I'm doing Vlogmas throughout the month of December, I'm going to have a video every single day, which is in and of itself going to be quite the interesting challenge. But I'll be reading quite a lot in December, so there's plenty for me to discuss. And since, again, it's going to have its own video, Deadly Curiosities, there's no real point in me kind of going into a discussion here other than to say I liked it far more than I expected. And I've already started reading the second book in the series and enjoying that as well. So look for that review to come out later in December. Now, for the books that I actually did read cover to cover in November, there was three. All three were Nonfiction November reads. And the first one of those is The Motion of Light and Water, Sex and Science Fiction Writing in the East Village. It's Samuel R. Delaney's memoir. Samuel R. Delaney, if you've watched my videos from the beginning, you will see I've mentioned probably more than anybody else on my channel. He is one of my favorite writers, one of my favorite science fiction writers, though technically he classifies himself as science fantasy because he's not hard sci-fi so much. Even though there's enough of elements in it in it of hard sci-fi, but he has enough that he calls himself science fantasy. And this is his memoir about his time as a young author living in the East Village, newly married, and what his life was like, his personal life, and he goes into this slowly starting his writing career. And I've already filmed and uploaded a whole full-blown video of this book and my thoughts on it. And again, I will link that up in the cards here. And you might be seeing a pattern as to why there's not a traditional TBR video here, since, again, all of these books that I'm mentioning here that I read are pretty much all getting their own reviews. And the next book I read cover to cover, and I actually read in 2 sittings, I just devoured it, is Chronicles Volume 1 by Bob Dylan. It's Bob Dylan's memoir about his time coming to New York City to break into the folk music scene. And interestingly enough, it also takes place in the Village in 1961, in the West Village. And when I put these 2 on my TBR for Nonfiction November, I didn't really make the connection at first. And then when I realized they were both 1961, I decided I had to read them back to back. And if you're interested in reading both of these books, I would recommend reading The Motion, Light, and Water first, and then reading Chronicles Volume 1. And only mainly because Dylan makes like a brief, like 1/2 a page appearance in The Motion of Light and Water. And so it's kind of a funny little moment that Delaney experienced with Dylan before anyone knew who Dylan was. And then, of course, Chronicles Volume 1 is about the West Village, McDougal Street, and what life was like there among the folk scene. And Chronicles Volume 1, I also have now up on my channel a full-blown review. So I will put that on the cards as well. So you can go click on that and see what I thought about it. And I go into, I think, an in-depth enough review of the book to tell you what it's about, and some recommendations I have, and certain things to listen to or read, or I mostly listen to before you start reading that book. And you can click on that there as well. And now the third book that I finished up for this month, my third Nonfiction November book, was Seeking the Compassionate Life by Carl Goldberg and Virginia Crespo. And this is a really interesting book. I'm not going to do a book review on it as a separate thing, only because I don't know anywhere near enough about psychiatry, psychology, psychoanalytics to even begin to do a review of the book. But it was really, really interesting. The main audience for the book are people in those professions, but it is also written for the layman, like me and many others. And Carl goes through a whole bunch of case studies, many of them from his own, what he calls clients or patients. And of course, enough of the names and circumstances are changed so that there's no ethical violations here. But he works through different patients he's helped and how he connected with each of them and what he learned from them as well. And I think one of the big gist or the point of this book and why he wrote it is to reach out to his profession and get them to kind of shift their focus on how they do their job and how they treat and help people, and about trying to be more compassionate about what's going on in their lives and why, and how to help them from a compassionate standpoint. And one of the big things he talks about here is what he sees as shame not being noticed enough, and shame often misdiagnosed as guilt, and how they're very, very different things. Because from his point of view, shame is all about the present, guilt is about the past, and then the anticipatory apprehension, that kind of nervous part, is all about the future. And a lot of people, in his view, were misdiagnosed as guilt when they were actually experiencing shame. And he doesn't look at shame as a bad thing. For him, shame is you in the moment recognizing there's something wrong. Something's not right here. Whether it's your own reaction or action you're taking in that moment, or the action or reaction somebody else is taking in that same moment, or you just recognize that there's something, like there's a societal ill happening here, and it makes you uncomfortable. And one of the ways you feel uncomfortable is to feel shame about not knowing how to deal with the moment and what to do in the moment. And it's not really a bad thing. And he thinks it's often misdiagnosed as there's something wrong with you if you're feeling shame, when he says it's just the opposite. It's a positive reaction to him, that your brain is telling you something's not right here and needs to be fixed. And it's you reacting in the moment. And a lot of people misdiagnose that as you feeling guilty for something you've done, when it's not that at all. And that takes psychiatrists or psychologists down a completely wrong path in treatment, thinking it's guilt for something you've done in your past and trying to find it, when it's really just shame in the moment of you not understanding how to react to what you're experiencing real time. And he also talks about how he doesn't believe there's enough focus on the psychiatrist, psychologist, psychoanalyst in recognizing feeling these same three things, shame, guilt, anticipatory apprehension, in the moment of treating a patient. Some psychiatrist or whatever get uncomfortable with a patient because it's making them face things in themselves that they might not be facing. And he makes a case to kind of embrace that and study it in yourself. And why does this patient trigger this in you? There's some connection between the two of you. Harness it and utilize it to make that connection with that person, that real connection, human to human, that's needed in this kind of a clinical setting to begin to try to make any kind of headway and breakthrough, and at least send them in the right path. Whether someone can be healed or not is a whole separate discussion. But so it's a really, really interesting book. Again, I don't know anything about these fields, and I've not studied them. I'm not part of them. I'm an IT guy, so I work with computers and things. I'm not people. But really, really interesting book. But I don't know enough about the subject matter to do a full-blown review. So I guess consider these last couple of minutes my sort of mini review of the book. But if you're going into that profession or in that profession, I highly, highly recommend it. I was lucky enough to get a copy of this book from Virginia. Carl had died before I could meet him, and Virginia and my sister are really good friends. And so I've had the chance to meet Virginia a few times and talk to her, and she gave the book to me. The book is over there on my shelf. I started recording this before I remember to take it off the shelf, so I'll somewhere along the last few minutes is a picture of the cover here. And that's pretty much my reading for the month. But like I said, most of my month was spent doing NaNoWriMo. And NaNoWriMo was a really fun experience for me. It is the second time I've ever done it. And luckily I did pass the 50,000 mark. I finished up past 50,000, I think, on November 22nd, which was important because I knew that last week of November was just work-wise just going to be, I'd have hardly any time to write, which is what ended up being the case. So I'm glad I pushed myself in the earlier part of the month. And I also had the luxury of having the entire Thanksgiving week off. So the bulk of my reading was in that week. And once I had finished getting past 50,000 words. So it was that week was the most productive week probably in the entire month, at least reading wise. And a couple of weeks leading up to that was all writing for me. And I had a really interesting time. It was a really good writing experience. I still have another 10, 15,000 words to go to finish off this first draft. But it was a really good learning experience for me in terms of story. And the only thing that I've used NaNoWriMo for the first time and now this time is for writing backstory. If I have either a character or a place or an event that's going to have an impact on a particular story I'm writing, NaNoWriMo seems to be the perfect vehicle to put that aside and then do an intensive deep dive into either that person's history, character, event, whatever, and spend a month just diving in and fleshing that out. And that was my NaNoWriMo experience. My initial thought was, I have this tribe of women who live in this desert, in this deep desert, and they are a group of sort of mystics. They have, I guess they're a form of wizards, if you will, even though I don't use that terminology. And one of the more famous ones, she's a kind of a main character in this other series I'm writing. I wanted to go back and tell the story of how she came to be a member of this mystical group. And that was my plan for NaNoWriMo. And then I sat down and I wrote the very first sentence, and it was it was dialogue. And it said, Sola is dead. And the moment I wrote that dialogue, I knew this famous character was not the one speaking. And I knew it was somebody else. And then I realized in that moment that it's not her story of how she comes to be part of this team, this group. It's the story of the member of the group who sent out of the desert to go find her and bring her to them. And it instantly became her story instead. And the story just instantly came to life and took off from there. And what's interesting about this is the main action, which is where I've finally arrived in my writing for this Nano project, takes place in this particular city. That's got a really bad, it's a really bad place, a really dark place, powerful dark magic in it. And in the main book I'm writing with this main famous character, one of the things they have to do is they have to go to this city. And I've always known I can't write that until I write it. And I have to write it in the past, that I know what they're going to attempt, someone's attempted and failed. And so I knew I needed to go and write that failed story first. And I started that, and I wrote the whole opening section of it. But I included this famous character in it. And then I realized there's no possible way it could work in that story's timeline, even as the opening section of the book. Throws everything off. And I put it aside because I knew it wouldn't work. And then I realized as I started writing this one, because I didn't have any plans for this Nano story to take me to that city until I was like, I think the second chapter in, and then I realized, boom, that's where this girl she's looking for is being taken. So she's going to have to go there, this main character, who's an older woman from the desert, from this mystical tribe. And this is a challenge for me as well, because I'm used to writing multiple POV characters. Like if I write 500 pages, there's probably going to be 6 different points of view chapters from people. So this was I think the first time I'm attempting to write a story straight through with only a single POV character. It's third person, of course, still. But this is a really interesting challenge to tell it through the eyes of only one person. And that is a challenge for me, because I'm used to, normally, with the people that I have here, there's 2 or 3 of them that already would be points of view characters. But I'm keeping it a narrow focus here. I want it deliberately to be a narrow focus, to be this woman's story and her journey to find this young girl who ends up becoming this famous member of their mystical group. And so now I'm pretty excited, but I've gotten up to that moment where they have to now go into this city. And before I can continue this, basically writing the finale of this story, I have to sit down and I'm going to have to draw out a detailed map of the city itself and what's in there and where everything is. Because I really can't write it unless I know the specific paths they have to take inside the city. Because there's an outer wall with a gate, and then there's a whole outer ward inside that wall. And in the heart of the city, where this sort of, if you dark sort of lore, dark wizard kind of person is, there's another inner wall and an inner gate. And that inner part is kind of a maze where it's narrow alleys that run up and down and all around. And it's tough getting in and out of, especially if you don't know it and you're being chased by all sorts of like demons and all sorts of things, which is going to be the case. So I really kind of have to sit down and really carefully draw out that inner circle of the city, because I won't be able to write that whole finale without having that path laid out. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I was originally planning to finish off draft 1 here in December, but I'm going to instead spend December crafting that map and drawing it in detail and working the path. I've pantsed a lot of the draft up to this point, and this is the point now where I have to plot the whole finale to make it work right. So I'm looking forward to doing that this month, in between all of the reading that I'm going to be doing in December, which is crazy. But just some final thoughts here about my month of November, about wrap-up videos, about TBR videos. Silvia has some discussions about those in her Vlogmas Day 1 video, which she just put up the other day. She talks about an initial discussion about monthly wrap-up. She's going to be putting out a specific video, which may or may not be up by the time this video is up. I don't know. But where she just kind of touches on this subject initially. So I'm going to link that down below. And then she has a TBR video, yes or no TBRs, that she did in August. I'll link that down below as well. And so we'll see. With December being the way it's structured as well, it's going to be I'm going to have 31 videos, I guess, if I go Vlogmas past even Christmas all the way to New Year's, which I'm thinking about doing. Kind of pointless to do a TBR video at the end of the month when I've done a video every single month. There won't be anything left unsaid by the time the end of the month rolls around. But I'm going to be doing a discussion video about my 2018 goals. That's going to come out sometime this month as well. And where I'm going to kind of sit down and think about what do I want to accomplish in 2018. So yeah, my thoughts are churning on that, and I have a feeling I'm just going to pop the camera on and turn my microphone on and just start rambling, just to kind of capture my initial thoughts, and whether I could like clip those into a coherent video, discussion video, and post that, or whether they'll at least get my mind moving and working on it enough and let me go back and rewatch it to kind of crystallize what I really want to say. I don't know yet. I have a lot of like thoughts about what I want to do with my BookTube channel in 2018, but like I said, there's a whole video for that. So, and now I guess I'm at the point where I usually do my pick of the month. Like, if you were to only read one book out of the books I've read this month, which one would it be? In October and November, I've done that in my wrap-up videos. And since this is sort of a wrap-up video, I should do it here as well. And that's really difficult. I've been struggling with this because both memoirs are 5-star reads. Who Fears Death is a 5-star read. And how do I choose between the three? I don't know. I really don't know. Since it was a Nonfiction November month, I am going to go with memoirs, and I'm going to choose The Motion of Light and Water, Sex and Science Fiction Writing in the East Village, as my pick of the month for the books that I've read. Since I know I'm going to be rereading Who Fears Death in January or February and then doing a full-blown review, it might end up being my pick of the month that month. We'll see. And that's it. That's November. That's a wrap. I'm recording this on day 2 of Vlogmas in December, And I hope you're all having a great December. I hope those who are doing Vlogmas, best of luck. This is my first time ever trying anything like this, recording a video every day. We'll see how I do. And I'm going to sign off now. I am Charles of SirBookSage. Happy reading.